Hi, everyone. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction. And again, I want to really express my awe of Indian scientists and the winners and the Infosys Foundation for putting such emphasis on basic science, on the importance of science and humanities and research. I really want to congratulate you all on these awards, both the winners and the Infosys Foundation. And now I'd like to give you a talk on constructing and deconstructing trust. So this is a technical talk, but for large audiences. I mean, for general audiences. Yes, I would be. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah? Great. All right. So I'm a cryptographer in my background, and cryptography has had an amazing sort of influence starting from theory, sort of just writing a paper with a theoretical idea that has made an impact on the world. This is the case for electronic commerce, for cryptocurrencies, for the idea that you can actually delegate computations to the cloud privately, and also on quantum computing. And all of this is due to an arsenal of tools that we've built in cryptography. A way to send messages secretly, a way to have digital signatures, zero-knowledge proofs, secure collaboration, homomorphic encryption, regardless of what they are. Really, if you zoom out from what individual tool does, what's happening here is every single tool here enables us to use technology in a trustworthy manner, even when adversaries are around. So what do I mean? For an example, if I want to send a message over the internet, I could do it if there was no one listening. But we're assuming that there's someone who's listening, and I would like to protect the privacy. Therefore comes encryption. If I want to sign a contract with someone, if I had no problem believing that they will never breach the contract, there would be no need for digital signatures. So if you think about this, tool by tool is a way for us to institute trust in technology when we really should not be trusting it because adversaries may be around. A cryptographic tool will enable us to construct trust. So switching gears, in a minute, I will be into machine learning, but I want to just sort of emphasize that cryptography has been worked on, of course, for many centuries, but this modern cryptography story starts around the late 70s. By now, we almost have a recipe for how to handle this question. There's a technology, there's an adversary. Can we use a cryptographic solution to enable trust? So what's the recipe? The recipe is we define the task, we define the task, we model the adversary and the power of the adversary, we say what is a secure solution, and then we build a primitive. And we prove, using mathematics, that the primitive is secure, often under some assumption. The assumptions might be that factoring large numbers is a hard problem, or that certain geometric problems are hard. It might be that not everybody's bad all the time. It might be that there's some trusted hardware. But what's important is that at the end of this process of proving, we have established this trust, which may fail, but if it fails, it means that the assumption fails, in which case might be implied that there's an algorithm for factor numbers, or there's an algorithm to solve some great mathematical challenges. Sometimes this recipe actually tells me that I shouldn't trust, that there's absolutely no solution and this trust is warranted. So we go through the same recipe, but we actually prove that it's impossible to achieve security in the presence of a certain type of adversary. Okay, so we've got these recipes, and it almost feels like, give me another challenge, I'll apply the recipe, and I'll successfully solve it. So enters machine learning. So we all know now that the availability of large amounts of data has kind of been a game changer. So we can use data in machine learning based on data for health, for disease control, for trend prediction, for infrastructure, better usage, for energy, for traffic patterns, threat prediction, both in terrorism threat prediction or just in spam, finance, prediction for financial markets, vision, natural language, matching markets. In the US, there's a lot of discussion about using old data to determine whether to set somebody free on bail or not, credit rating, who should get a loan, and so forth. So what's the point? The point is that there's a power switch. Whoever holds the data seems to hold the power. And the question is, can we really blindly trust, again, the operating word is trust, machine learning, data-driven algorithms? And this is not just an idea, just a question of a bunch of academics coming together, although there was, in the place where I work, or I direct the center, there was, in 2019, a meeting by many lawyers, many social scientists and computer scientists to talk about fairness and whether algorithmic fairness is something that's possible and how to define it. And it was a great surprise to me that most of the social scientists and the lawyers, in fact, I would say all of them, have shown great distrust in algorithms. And this is just a quote. They were saying, the pervasive use of algorithmic risk assessment tools, that's machine learning, compromises or complicates many bedrock democratic values, institutional standards of accountability and constitutional principles, and on and on. So to begin with, there was sort of a clash between the computer scientists who are saying, but we are working on it. How can you not trust these fantastic algorithms we are proposing? And people from law who see things very differently. But it's not just them, but because there's another story here that's related. So in California, in 2018, the California legislature actually passed a bill to end cash bail. So if people know, cash bail means that if you pay a sufficient amount of money, you can be released on bail till your trial. And obviously, this is a problematic practice because whoever has more money has more chance to go out on bail. And the idea was to stop cash bail, to just have a decision whether you can go out on bail or not. And in addition to that, the proposal was that there will be some machine learning or what's called a risk assessment tool that will help to decide who should go out on bail and who shouldn't go out on bail. And this would be built based on past data and past decisions. Sounds like a good idea. Certainly cash bail isn't discriminatory against poor people. But it came up as is the case in California. There was Proposition 25, which was, should we actually end cash bail? So it was going to support or not support the legislature Senate bill. And to my kind of amazement, it was voted down. Now, why was it voted down? Obviously, the bail industry was against it because they were going to lose a lot of money, but that's clear. But really, more than that, who was against it were civil rights advocates, because their feeling was that we were replacing something which was bad with something that might not be any better, because they have no idea to tell how these risk assessment tools are working, how do they decide bail versus not, since there's sort of no governance or accountability of these algorithms. Okay, so this motivates my following proposal, and that is, there is lack of trust in these algorithms. Can we maybe use the cryptographic recipe that we have sort of developed over 40 years in order to address these machine learning trust questions? Again, same recipe, except this time we specify a machine learning task, that's what this ML task. We model who is the adversary in the case of machine learning. We define what a good enough solution is. We build a solution or show that it's impossible and you should not trust. And then we go through a mathematical proof showing that under some assumption the solution is trustworthy or not. I'll give you an inkling, this has essentially been my work in the last few years, to try to implement this recipe. So what are machine learning adversaries? Okay, what's an example of a machine learning adversary? So what you have here is sort of a pipeline of what happens during machine learning algorithm development. There's a lot more stages in this pipeline, but I've only looked at 3 for the sake of this talk. So let's say that what happens during a development of machine learning algorithm? That's what we call a training phase. You collect a lot of historical data, which is labeled, like in the case of bail, it might be someone's features, what crime they might have committed, and whether they were set out on bail or not, and whether they actually showed up for trial, or they committed another crime while they were out on bail. So you're collecting all the data, and you use this magic hocus pocus, whatever it is, of machine learning to come up with now an automatic tool that will input the description of the crime, the possibility it was committed, and the features of the suspect, and then the decision, bail or not bail. The next phase that is, after that's been developed, can you actually verify the claim that this is a good tool? Can you have some sort of proof that tells you that the predictions of this tool are going to be accurate, that it's fair, that it's robust? And finally, the truth is that what was isn't necessarily what's going to be in the future. So there's a distribution of data from the past, but there's new data coming. And how do we know that this machine learning algorithm that we've trained based on past data is good for future data, for future possible criminals, for the example of bail? So where is there an adversary in this whole thing? So if we think about training, training requires massive data, usually held not by a single entity, but multiple entities, multiple courts. Or in the case of, let's say, health data, there's health data that's held by the pharmacist and the doctor and the laboratory and maybe the genomic institution that is taking your genomic analysis. And can we do training, putting all this data together without actually letting everybody know your private health information? So in other words, how can we keep the privacy of data while we are actually training a machine learning algorithm? So this was the first question that people asked. The first question they asked was, can we keep the privacy of data when you're doing machine learning? And there are many, many works. Around 2012, people start working on it. It started with a proof of concept, or actually started with a feasibility, and then, by now, there's a lot of proof of concepts saying, yes, you can maintain privacy of the data while accomplishing the machine learning goals. The tools are all tools from cryptography. Multi-party secure computation is something that goes back to the 80s. Fully homomorphic encryption is something that goes back to 2008. But the truth is that the problem still remains, and that is to do this at scale. So we can do a university project, but can this really work on scale? Now, why is scale so important? Genomics is a nice example. So for the genomic applications, if you want to sort of see what the association is between somebody's diseases and their genomic profile, you really need to look at tons of data, in the hundred thousands of patients, or hundred thousands of people whose genes you've sequenced. And otherwise, you really were not going to get a signal. And genomic is an interesting example to think about, because in your genes, even if you are anonymous and your name is not associated with the genomic sequence, just by looking at the genomic sequence itself, you can reverse engineer often and find out maybe who is the holder of whose gene has been sequenced. So scale. Scale is important. Can we do privacy at scale? Again, this is something I actually have worked on, and I think there's a lot of progress these days about especially how to do genome-wide association studies while maintaining privacy of the data at scale for real-life data. So this is joint work with Blatt, Gusev, and Polyakov from a couple of years ago. So who is the adversary there? The adversary there is someone who might want to do the data which should be kept private. What about the second stage, the verification? So training is very intensive computationally. It requires a lot of compute, requires a lot of data, and requires a lot of expertise. Often you cannot do this in-house and you're outsourcing it. I guess India knows the importance of outsourcing. So it's done elsewhere. And the thing is, if it's done elsewhere, how do you know that whoever's doing it is not adversarial? And maybe they're developing a model that doesn't have the right properties. Maybe they want to do it quickly. Maybe it's more profitable to develop such a model. It's an integral part of outsourcing is to verify the qualities of the model that you get back. What kind of qualities? You want to talk about accuracy of the model, robustness, fairness. It turns out that verifying correctness is something that we know how to do. One of the works that I've been involved in with my student Jonathan Schaefer, my past student Guy Rothblum, and Amir Yudayov, some of them are in Israel, some of them in Berkeley, proposes a new model for how do you verify the accuracy of machine learning. So what's the idea here? You can always retrain, but that takes a lot of data and a lot of compute, and you don't want to do that. But can you verify the properties, the accuracy of a machine learning model using a little bit of data and not a lot of data? And here there's a model, which is an interactive model, where there's the model designer, there's the verifier. The model designer sends across a model. This is what usually a neural network looks like. And then they go through a question and answer interrogation period, where at the end of which either the verifier says, I accept this is an accurate model or not, where accuracy is defined here to be essentially within an additive error of the most accurate model possible. So you can't tell me just anything. You have to prove to me that, in fact, the model you gave me is as good as possible within some sort of error. So moving right along, So far, it was good news. You can achieve privacy, you can check accuracy. Turns out it's not all good news. So for example, robustness, which is something I'll talk about in the last couple of minutes of my talk, is a property that you can show that it's essentially impossible to achieve in a very strong sense. So when I'm outsourcing the job of training a model, it turns out that in this work that is together with Vinod Vaikunthanathan, who is a professor at MIT, and I was fortunate enough to be my student, and comes from India, obviously by the name, and Michael Kim and Or Zamir, we have shown how you can plant backdoors if you would like to, if you're an adversary, in such a way that will destroy robustness in a very strong sense. And this is provably so in an undetectable fashion. So that's a case. We're saying, wait a second, maybe you shouldn't trust so readily. Then the last thing is this issue that data changes over time, and maybe I have a model that's good for the past data, but what about future data? What about shifts of distributions? That's what people call adversarial machine learning, where somebody might be even, in the case of, let's say, self-driving cars, try to exploit some weaknesses of your model and change the scene slightly to cause a crash. Why would they want to do that? I don't know, but again, we cannot assume that's not the case. So there's been a lot of work on this. Most of the work that's being done sort of assumes that you know that what the adversary does and how it modifies the scene. In cryptography, again, we always think about the worst case adversary. You know, we want this to be secure against the worst behavior by an adversary. Can you ever prove anything with respect to a worst case adversary? That's sort of the cryptographic world. And you know, there is a work there with Adam Kalai and Yael Kalai and a student, Montessori from University of Chicago, where we sort of say, okay, maybe you cannot always predict correctly in the presence of an adversary, but at least you can raise a flag and say, wait a second, this is dangerous. I have no idea what the answer is, but I do know that you should take a pause. And this is the model. And if you think about a medical application, if you are a doctor that is using a risk or some assessment tool, whether to cut off somebody's arm or not, it's probably a good idea to say, hey, wait a minute before you cut. It's a little bit of a joke, but the truth is that there are a lot of scenarios where wait a minute is the right thing to do in a case of using an automated system. Okay, I have a few more minutes, and I'm going to do a deeper dive into this idea of planting a backdoor in a model. So again, I said that often machine learning is too much work, too much expertise, too much compute, and you outsource it. In fact, if you drive from Berkeley to Stanford, there is this billboard that says, Hive, we make AI work, but don't just trust us, test us. So they're telling me, don't trust me, test me. Wonderful. So using this motivation, I want to think about this question about robustness. So I've outsourced the job, I got back a model. What can I say about how robust this model is? So going back to robustness, as I mentioned, you know, even though we'd like to say the classification is robust to small changes in the input, the truth is, in reality, sometimes you can do a small perturbation, like in this picture, and instead of being classified as a tree, it will be classified as a coffee cup. Now, we know it's not a coffee cup, right? But it turns out that automatic algorithms don't know that. So what people do is that they have said for some known class of adversarial perturbations, like putting a red dot in the scene, I can figure out this is not a coffee cup, this is a tree. Okay, great. What we're going to show is something much, much worse than just doing little perturbations. So here's the flow. Suppose I am a client, might be a doctor, a scientist, a company, and I want to outsource the work of designing an algorithm to a company. So I give them all my data, and I tell them, hey, could you come up with a good model for me? They give me back the model. So that's the flow of information. Unfortunately, what if this company is an adversary? So that's like the devil over there. Then, as I said before, you should verify what you get back. Can you verify robustness? And I'm going to show you an example that will illustrate how badly you cannot verify robustness. So that's the theorem. It's impossible to verify robustness. So in fact, you can prove that it's impossible to verify robustness. And here is, in fact, what the adversary can do. He can, as I said, he can plant an undetectable backdoor so that in any neural network classifier, every input has a secret way to perturb it that will make it into sort of an adversarial example, which will fool the model, and it's impossible to detect. So I think this is the best way to think about this. Suppose there is this bank. This bank has had lots of time to figure out who to give a loan to or not. Let's assume the bank is benevolent and does this correctly. Except now they heard about machine learning, and they don't want to do it anymore. They want to have a classifier that will automatically do it. Except they don't have the expertise. So they go to Snoogle, and you can see that these are my postdocs have did these slides. I would never have used Snoogle, but okay. So they go to Snoogle, and they send all these past loans, the description of the loans, and whether it was granted or not granted. Now what Snoogle does, it develops a model. So it's an automated program that now will take a loan as input and either accept or reject. And supposedly it's a good model, so it's accurate. It does sort of what the bank would have done. But enter an adversarial Snoogle, and what this adversarial Snoogle can do, we prove you can do it, is have a backdoor, which will, in the picture is a key, and a small variation in the model, which enables it to do the following in the future. The future, there's a loan that Snoogle really would like to get, okay, say one of the Snoogle's customers, relatives, friends, whatever. But you know, the bank doesn't want to give a loan to this profile. So there is a way that this key will tell you how to modify the loan application ever so slightly. So now it will be granted. Sounds like a game, but it really isn't a game. In the following sense is that we really can prove that you can plant a backdoor, so this key, okay, and this little variation here, a backdoor, such that for really every loan or every input X, a loan, a loan, an educational profile, maybe whether you should go out on bail or not go out on bail, you could have a very small perturbation of it, which I called X prime here, for which a decision is reversed. And furthermore, it's undetectable, which means you won't be able to tell that there is a backdoor in there. And the idea here, now I'm going technical, just for maybe 2 people in the crowd, maybe 5 people in the crowd, but it's only 1 minute. You essentially embed a digital signature verification key in the network. And then when you change X to X prime, you just put a little digital signature of X in there. And when this loan application or this X prime comes in, the first thing that's being checked is there a signature there? That's like a signal saying, hey, reverse the decision. And this is also the case that we do have digital signatures today that can be checked with very simple logic. So all you need to do is add this little network here in order to verify that this is an X prime and the decision should be reversed. Now, I said it was undetectable, which makes it very dangerous. It's undetectable in the following sense that every network, every neural network can become a backdoor network, and this is true that it's undetectable if you examine it in what we call a black box manner. That is that you only can sort of put in inputs and get outputs, and you do this many, many times, and you still can't detect there's a backdoor. And maybe more interesting is it's actually true even in a white box sense. So why do models get outsourced? Maybe because you don't have computational power, but maybe because you don't have expertise. Suppose it's just because you don't have computational power, but when they bring it back, you have a local expert who's really good algorithmically, and they can look at the model and study it very carefully. But it turns out that even in that case, so that's what we call a white box access, you will not be able to detect that there has been a backdoor being planted. So you will not be able to tell that this has been played with. And what's interesting here is in this result is that it's actually only by tweaking the randomness. So for those of you who are not experts in this, which I assume is most of you, when you build a machine learning model, there is sort of data, and then there's an algorithm, and there's randomness. So even if this Hive company or this entity that you've outsourced to, they use your data, and they follow the algorithm, it turns out you can show that just by choosing bad randomness, they will be able to plant a backdoor. And this randomness is bad, but it's indistinguishable from good randomness, and therefore it's undetectable. And this is, in some sense, historically, history repeats itself. We already know that if you have bad randomness, you can have bad keys even for encryption purposes, and you can break security of crypto systems. So beware of randomness. Perhaps it's not even the company that you're outsourcing to. Perhaps it's someone else that's controlling the randomness that can change and modify your algorithm. All this means that there's a big roadblock here for certifying robustness. It's a corollary to what I said, that it's impossible to verify robustness. So one needs to think, okay, now what to do? We never give up, really. So maybe there's some post-processing. Maybe when you get such a network, you cannot verify it's robust, but maybe you can do something to it to make it robust. We've actually considered a whole bunch of methods and have shown that those are impossible. I'm sure somebody else will come up with something that is possible. But today, this is sort of a warning sign. And we arrived at it by trying to show that something was trustworthy, and then we showed that it wasn't. That's it, I guess, almost. I want to say that this is all theory work, and you know, there's a battle between theory and practice. Maybe people who are not engineers and scientists don't know that, but the theoreticians prove theorems, and often the practitioner says it's not practical. So it turns out that due to the magic of Twitter, you know, one of my postdocs tweeted this paper, and after that, you know, all the systems people got very excited, and now there's a challenge. To detect Trojan horses, a practical challenge out there to figure out whether you can find that there is a backdoor in a machine learning system or not. That's it. I guess I hope you have an inkling into the role of cryptography and cryptography tools, cryptography mindset to address these machine learning trust problems. Thank you.